I want to welcome Matt O'Connor, who is a really experienced marketing leader who's been in and around the digital health space for close to a decade and has just seen a lot of what works, a lot of what doesn't work. Matt and I were also colleagues at Modern Age, where we also saw a lot of what didn't work. I think he brings a tremendously valuable and seasoned perspective. He's probably one of the most experienced people out there on this topic, which is a super important topic for all of us building business in the space, which is how do you grow? How do you find people? And he's currently an executive vice president at Everlywell, which is one of the largest lab testing companies in the space. I would like you, if you don't mind, Matt, does that sound good? Is there anything that you want to add to that? Otherwise, I'd love to turn it over to you and just have you start by sharing some of your observations about where the space is and what some of the things are you're most excited about when it comes to growth in the health space.
Yeah, good to see you and glad to be able to do this today. I can start off with a quick background intro so people have a bit more context on me and what I've done in my past. Shockingly to myself, I do have almost a decade in this space. I've been operating as a consumer marketer and executive for a while. I grew up a consumer marketer early in my career. Moved into the digital health space. Depending on how you define it, I was in health, wellness, and fitness for a minute, but I've been in actual digital health since 2020, beginning of that year, right as the pandemic was about to start. I was the general manager for Keeps, which is part of 30 Madison. I led their men's health business for 30 Madison, took that business from 20 million when I joined, scaled it to over 100 million during the time that I was there. Some real massive growth during that time period. Subsequent to that, I was chief growth officer at Found, one of the early pioneers in medication-assisted weight loss. Found is a company that provides some lessons about some opportunities for maybe how to take better advantage of market trends. Anat and I worked together at Modern Age, where I served as interim chief marketing officer. I've been the general manager of the consumer business here at Everly for the last year and a half. Everly is probably the pioneer of at-home consumer diagnostics. During my time here, we really focused on doubling down in our strength in diagnostics and making sure that we're the best place for consumers to get the lab testing they need, irrespective of form factor or modality. We also combine diagnostic services with broader telehealth offerings. So that's a bit of a walkthrough of my career and my professional experience of late.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Just to reiterate, so much depth, so much experience. You've seen so much. I guess maybe a great place to start would be tell me about some of the things you are most excited about, some of the trends you're seeing with respect to health businesses, especially businesses at the frontier of health, which is relevant to a lot of the folks who are listening. What are some of the things that you see really working that are noteworthy and are worth spotlighting?
Yeah, I think a few things. And I'll come back to the question around what is happening currently that's interesting. I think of the organizations that I've been at, I think that Keep/30 Madison did a lot of things really right that are worth doubling down on. From the start, Keeps had a very focused, so Keeps, if you're not familiar with it, is one of the leading brands in men's health, specifically focused on men's hair loss prevention. When Keep started, the core focus was indeed men's hair loss prevention. There were other brands at the time, Hims and Rowe, 30 Madison were all in that first wave of direct to consumer digital health pioneers. It was interesting to me as I would talk to consumers at Keeps, like a lot of them came to us rather than Hims or Rowe, in part because the core focus was men's hair loss. Consumers would say things to me like, these other brands that are out there are like hawking e-meds. I don't want ED meds. I am losing my hair and want to prevent that. And with Keeps, that's all you do. Scientific and evidence-based approach to how I treat the problem. I just have more confidence that you're the right solution for me. And so I think from the get-go, we had a strong thesis at 30 Madison that being the best place to help men stop hair loss was going to be a winning brand proposition. Now, I think one kind of caveat to that is that over time, if you're just in one vertical, your growth potential can get capped, and then you need to think about other adjacent verticals to move into. I think getting the timing of that and sequencing of that requires some nuance and can be challenging. But certainly as you're starting off, being really good at the core service or product that you're offering, really crushing that with consumers and making sure that they understand that's your strength and your bread and butter counts for a lot. So that's one thing. We had a more diversified acquisition engine than a lot of brands do out the gate, where typically in direct to consumer digital health, like oftentimes Facebook/Meta will be the only channel that brands focus on. And there's a reason that brands focus on Meta. It tends to be a good channel to drive awareness and demand for your product. Meta obviously allows a lot of video advertising, and video tends to be a better format to raise people's awareness to, hey, you may not even be thinking about the fact that you're losing your hair, or you could be losing your hair like your dad and your grandfather did, but you should be thinking about it. And there's a great solution for you. It's called Keeps in the case of that brand. That is important. But one thing we did well at Keeps was thinking about other channels. Keeps, for example, included TV advertising as a part of the marketing mix much earlier than a lot of other brands did. And TV was treated as a direct response channel. We measured the acquisitions driven by that channel directly. We had a CAC associated with the channel. It wasn't treated as a brand channel, but it was part of the mix at a time when not necessarily all brands were doing that. And it was part of our strength to help fuel the growth over time. Thirdly, I'd say there was a real focus on LTV maximization, LTV meaning customer lifetime value. From the start of that business, hair loss medications is an inherently sticky space to operate in because there are some challenges in that you don't see results immediately, but you can get someone to stay 6 months, they're going to probably stop losing their hair. And a lot of people are going to see regrowth. Just clinically, that's what the evidence shows on finasteride, which is the main kind of RX medication that Keeps Hims and Ro and other hair loss brands offer. You can get people past that point, or certainly past the year point. You probably have them for a long time because they're going to see success that helps keep people on the program. So it's inherently sticky. Having an inherently sticky offering is really helpful when you're trying to build a business model in this space that can work. If you're reliant on one-time purchases and having to get your customers to come back over and over again, i.e. not subscriptive, it's more challenging. You may have to spend more in paid marketing to get them to come back. Certain categories lend themselves better to subscriptive behavior than others. That was one real strength. We had a very thoughtful patient journey. Being really thoughtful about the customer journey in digital healthcare is super important. There are a lot of clinicians in this group. The role of the clinician is super important. One of the things that we found, even in hair loss, which is a super low acuity space, you might not think that people need to talk to a doctor. Honestly, like us sending emails from or secure messaging from the doctor, telling the customer, log into the portal and get your secure message from the doctor, drove way better engagement and ultimately retention than sending emails from the brand. People get a billion emails from brands. Most of us tune out 98% of those emails, but getting an email from your doctor or your clinician is something you're going to pay a lot more attention to. And even in the hair loss space, people could benefit from clinical education around what success looks like, what the truth around side effects was, those sorts of things. Those clinical engagement touch points were super valuable and impactful in driving strong business outcomes. I think the combination there of a strong, purposeful, focused brand, thoughtful acquisition approach, not just relying on one channel, and really thinking about building a business that allows you to engage a customer over their lifetime are all real strengths of any business and the sorts of things I think you should be thinking about as you're building a business in this space. I'll pause and see if you have any kind of follow-ups and we can get back to it.
That was amazing. And there was so much gold in there in terms of what you shared. But just to reflect back a few things, the first thing around the value of specificity, which I think is important for people who are building longevity businesses that often have this broad surface area. I think people who are building businesses need to understand that there is value to focus. Of course, there's a trade-off. You don't want to be so narrow that you become pigeonholed, but there are a number of brands that have successfully navigated an initial very focused value proposition. Madison's Keeps is one, certainly Ro & Hims, Hers, all those brands start off with a really narrow focus. A lot of people thought, how is this going to get bigger? How is this going to cross the chasm? And they all have at this point. They're all the biggest businesses in health. And I think there's a lesson to be learned for all of us who are building businesses. It may not necessarily be national telehealth businesses, but the idea of communicating value to people is still important. The second thing, just to hit on the thing you mentioned about messages from the clinician, that is something I have consistently seen. We saw it at Virta when we were trying to get people to engage. When we sent a message from the physician, those saw much higher engagement. We saw that at Modern Age. There is real weight to the voice of the doctor. And I think that's something that people should keep in mind when they're thinking of ways to keep people engaged, to get them to convert. The voice of the clinician really matters. The last thing is just around your point around direct response marketing. And we actually did a whole session a couple of weeks ago on the topic of direct response marketing. We did a case study on Alex Hormozi, who is probably the best direct response marketer out there. Obviously, very different business, but some real lessons to be learned there. So I think that was really great. Let me switch to Modern Age, because I think that is a topic a lot of people are interested in. It is a longevity company that actually still exists. People may not realize it exists as more of a local business, but I'm curious, what are some things you might do differently for Modern Age, given everything you've learned? If you were doing Modern Age's marketing strategy from the ground up, what would you do differently this time around?
Yeah, I think that, and would love your perspective on this too, because obviously you're at Modern Age for a longer amount of time than I, but I would say the original sin of that business was it didn't know what it was. And it both wanted to be a cosmetic dermatology business and simultaneously a longevity business. And if you went to the website, what the brand stood for and what the company actually did wasn't super clear. And it had the website kind of had this polished look. It kind of looked like a Botox office. And that made sense on some level because part of what we were doing was Botox and injections and those sorts of cosmetic derm things. But then the growth vertical for the business was longevity and the aging wellness assessment product, but there just wasn't necessarily like super clear. And I think we would hear from consumers that we didn't really necessarily know or understand like what it was that Modern Age really stood for or did. During the end of its first run as a business, that's when I was brought in. We shifted focus to be much more on the longevity products. We started putting some basics in place when it came to marketing. We revamped our meta approach and started bringing best practices in meta advertising to focus on the longevity products. We brought on better firms that knew how to create video assets that worked in meta and it had narratives like symptom solution type narratives that tend to work well on that platform where you feature a consumer or an actor representing a customer talking about feeling off and not knowing why, and then taking the aging wellness assessment and finding out that their hormone markers were off, and then being able to chart a path forward with the support of Modern Age. And those sorts of advertisements will bring our cost of acquisition down. I think had we out the gate really focused on, had it been clearly a longevity focused company and how we've been able to really focus on driving growth on the longevity products, I think we would have been a lot more successful than we were skirting both worlds. Would be interested in your take. I'm sure you have a more informed perspective.
You and I have spent many hours talking about this, certainly while we were still at Modern Age. Modern Age was an amazing collection of people, probably the most talented group of health leaders I've seen assembled. It reminds me of some of these sports teams like the 2004 Lakers, if anyone remembers that team. It had Shaq, Gary Payton, Karl Malone, and they didn't win the championship. Modern Age reminds me of that a little bit. And I think some of the points you mentioned, like the point around what is a value proposition, how did we show up when we first started? How you show up when you first start actually makes a big difference. The identity that you first show up with. There are lots of things that in startup and entrepreneurship we're often taught you can just ship an MVP and iterate, but there are some aspects to starting a business that are less flexible and that really matter. Your brand and how you show up and your value proposition actually matter a lot. It is very hard, especially for a business like this, which is highly trust driven, relationship driven. It's very hard to shake the skin of what you originally show up doing. I think that's something for everyone here to consider as they're opening up businesses, to really be thoughtful about what is that value proposition that you're going to show up with. And also to try and make it as simple as possible. There's an exercise I have people do in my group, which is to actually look at the App Store on iOS. Every app has a one-line description underneath the app name. And all of those descriptions are so dead simple. You cannot get away with saying vague stuff like we are a platform for XYZ, all the stuff that websites like to say when they have control of their own copy. Apple makes you be extremely simple. Like Uber is on-demand rides. That's it. On demand. Like you have to be very simple. And so I think that exercise for yourself, for your own brand, is important because that is how people understand you. Ask yourself, is that what you want to do? I think the one-line description of Modern Age when you first launched the brand, probably for most people was Med Spa on Fifth Avenue or something like that, right? Like it's basically what it was. But I think what we found, the product that we found the most traction on was basically a Function Health type product, right? Which actually before Function Health existed, we had launched a Function Health type product that was doing well. There were lots of green shoots around that. We see now that market is huge, but we didn't have the capital to continue to grow. I'm sure you and I both often think about, what could have been. In any case, I think that's my perspective, and I think I agree with you. Turning to stuff that you've seen work, you've spoken a little bit about 30 Madison and some of what they've done. Are there other things that you're seeing other businesses do that you think is really successful and really interesting that people should consider as far as tactics for growth and acquisition?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. One of the overall trends that I think is interesting right now in the broader digital health space is the rise of organizations like the two that come to mind most for me are MIDI and Nourish that have successfully built insurance. They're in network with a bunch of the payers. And they're as such, they're able to use insurance reimbursement as a direct consumer acquisition tool. And I think what these companies have done well, there's certainly a lot of work involved in building out those insurance networks. So there are companies that can help you do that now. Like Bridge is a company that helps startups get in network with payers. In addition to building out those networks, what both I think MIDI and Nourish have done well is really focus on this is going to be free to you or very little cost to you if you have commercial insurance. We can help you get menopause care, midlife care, or we can help you get connected with a registered dietitian to help you with your weight loss goals or whatever it is that you might want to talk to an RD about. I think where other companies have had challenges, like Cerebral way back when, tried to maintain both a cash pay funnel for consumers and an insurance reimbursement funnel. And it's just confusing. The consumer is confused. Am I paying the price they're paying is different if they're going one versus the other? It's confusing. Sometimes the incentives are different, frankly, as an organization in terms of utilization if you're cash pay versus insurance reimbursement. And so it's just creates a morass. And I think what both like MIDI and Nourish have done well is really focus on direct to consumer acquisition for customers with insurance. And that's the core of their acquisition marketing. I think brands like Hims have proven out that you can build a really big business in the cash space. And I think they were the original pioneer of have a provocative brand and like really lean into that. And I think others have followed in their steed. I think Wisp is an example of a newer brand, super focused on a specific customer like millennial and Gen Z women, and attracts them with a provocative approach to brand marketing. So I think that continues to be a way in this space, and especially it's healthcare. Not all brands feel comfortable doing it, and I don't think all brands are capable of doing it, but there certainly is a space for certain brands to take that more provocative brand approach. I continue to be fascinated by how many companies have been able to be successful in the compounded GLP space. I thought that this was going to peter out a lot more quickly than it appears to be petering out. I think 2 weeks ago, it was announced 30 Madison was being acquired by Remedy Meds. I've been working in this space for a long time. I really barely knew who Remedy Meds was, and they're a compounded GLP company that's grown to massive scale quite quickly. And so I think that speaks to a couple of things. I think it speaks to the size of the weight loss market and just the fact that GLPs remain such a massive opportunity. I think it also speaks to the fact that with the current administration and the regulatory environment, there's more openness to compounding than it seemed like there was a year ago. And so I think that has created an opportunity for companies in the GLP space. I also think if I were founding a business right now, I'd be thinking about what is potentially the next frontier that could be addressed with a combination of clinical services and compounded medications. Hims obviously has done a ton with compounds where you can get generic finasteride from a ton of different folks, but Hims has a compounded minoxidil and finasteride hair loss product. They have a compounded alternative to Viagra, and they do a lot of their business through compounding. What is the next less touched opportunity within the space where compounds can be a real part of the offering? I'd be thinking hard about that.
Excellent points. I do have a couple of things I want to reflect back, but let me just now say if people have questions they would like to ask as we're now at the half hour, please submit them in the Q&A section on Zoom if you're part of the mentorship program. And if you're not, you can type them in on LinkedIn. I will do my best to check LinkedIn. If people have questions they'd like to ask, please submit them. Let me just reflect back a couple things, and I see there's a couple of questions here already. The first is around insurance, right? I think that a lot of people, when they're opening up a practice or opening up a business, debate this point about insurance. The typical path that most people take is to say, don't do insurance. It's too complicated. There's too much overhead. But I do wonder if that calculus is changing because there are solution providers like Bridge making some of that overhead easier. And insurance covered services in this wellness space are becoming more prevalent to the point where I do wonder if people's tolerance for not having insurance cover it will erode. And so I do think that it is something worth considering, worth investigating what it would look like to implement insurance coverage. I think we'll probably do a session on this. For those of us in the mentorship group, we'll probably do a session on insurance coverage, how to do it. We'll look at that. We'll do a scan of the market to see who is doing it, what are the solution providers. And then the second thing that I wanted to say, let me just pause there. I want to move on to the questions. I don't want to take up all the airtime. On the topic of insurance, There's interest. She asks, it's helpful on acquisition for MIDI type business to bill a 992 visit based code plus cash for prescription. Do you have any thoughts on membership models that don't take insurance? Do you think that those are still viable?
I certainly think that they are. And lots of businesses have built, lots of cash pay businesses, lots of successful businesses in the healthcare space are non-insurance and cash pay. I think it depends a bit on the space that you operate in and the amount of dollars that the consumer is expected to pay as well. I think there's some nuance there. As you tend to get more, if you're operating in condition spaces that feel more healthcare-y, for lack of a better adjective, I think insured consumers tend to expect their insurance will cover it and should cover it. And typically, if a consumer has insurance and there's the capability of having something covered by insurance, they're going to want it covered by insurance. But there are obviously examples, like a lot of the folks in the longevity space, like you're never going to be able to get a specific like 100 biomarker panel covered by insurance. In order for your lab work to be covered by insurance, it needs to be medical necessity. How is there medical necessity for 100 biomarker panel? There are lots of businesses in the longevity space. Everly has a product like this, and that's obviously with Superpower, they have a product like this. I think we're all familiar with Function Health, they have a product like this, and are building meaningful membership businesses in this cash-based space. One benefit there is that this is just the sort of product that isn't typically going to be covered by insurance. I think the demand for weight loss meds is so high, and there's still challenges with insurance coverage of the branded weight loss medications. Lots of companies are building successful businesses in the cash pay compounded GLP space, to just name a couple of examples.
The other point I will make, just on the topic of GLP-1s, I think we are still underestimating the potential of these drugs to have an impact on the market. Weight loss is a much bigger market than we imagined, but a lot of us who are longevity physicians, functional medicine physicians, also see the application of these drugs in so many other contexts, including general anti-aging. And there are people in this space, and I hate to use the term anti-aging for lack of a better term, including people going to some of the leading conferences. Like I heard at ARDD, which is one of the most prominent scientific conferences on aging and longevity, there was a keynote presentation in which GLP-1s were cited or presented to people as, hey, this might be the first true longevity anti-aging drug that we have. And that made some waves. So I think we continue to underestimate the potential of these. Let me move on to the next question. So there's a question from Roberto. He asks, is the point that he raises is that something like hair loss, weight loss, there's a more straightforward path to impact. You can demonstrate impact of that. It's more straightforward. Something more broad like longevity is something, the path to impact is not as straightforward, right? Like it requires some personal investment, some personal effort, requires some iteration. It can take some time. How do you think about articulating that? And how do you think about that from a marketing perspective when the solution is not so straightforward?
I think that's right. It is one of the challenges and opportunities of this space. There are models now that people are increasingly familiar with, offerings like Function and others. And so I do think there's a larger market for a deep dive biomarker panel offering than there was in the past, right? So that potentially is helping there. But I do think one of the challenges in the longevity space is making it feel real and tangible and visceral to people as to what problem are you actually helping them solve. A lot of what has worked for Everly in marketing our Everly 360 product, which is Everly 360 is a annual membership product that gives the consumer access to lab results for 83 different biomarkers, clinical care stemming from those lab results, an optional live consult product to go over those results with a clinician. And again, it's an annual membership. The idea is you test those biomarkers annually, see how they change over time, and you continue to receive clinical guidance and support over time as well. Leaning into the problems that a product like this helps people identify and then solve has been really helpful for us from a marketing standpoint. Positioning this as something distinct and unique from traditional healthcare is a marketing tactic that has worked for us. Telling people that like the traditional healthcare system may not catch the things. A product like this is designed to help you catch that you can be proactive and in control of your health is a tactic that tends to work well from a marketing standpoint in this space. So from a tactical standpoint, those are some of my reactions to that question. I do think that the space is becoming increasingly crowded. More and more people are moving into longevity, and I do think that augurs in favor of going back to some of the points you were making at the outset of the conversation around having a clear value proposition. What is your offering? How is it distinct? Who are you serving in market? Who's your consumer? How is your offering designed to meet their need? And how is it distinct from what other people out there have to offer? I think some of the folks on this call are thinking about building local brick and mortar longevity practices. Presumably, Being able to have a one-on-one relationship with a clinician is going to be a big part of what folks like that are going to be able to offer, be able to have the relationship live and not mediated by digital communication. I think this space is becoming increasingly crowded and it really augurs in favor, again, of having being really clear about who the consumer is, what the value prop is, and how you're really going to help the consumer meet their needs.
Awesome. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that one thing I like to say is that I like to think about the future of this space being one where there is a tremendous diversity of solutions and services. I think that happens when we get really specific and targeted about what we do. At the moment, a lot of people, when they launch businesses, they have this kind of broad-based kind of functional health, longevity type value proposition, which I think can work. I think if you can hone in on the needs of a specific ethnic group, a specific demographic, a specific type of persona, right? Like you can start to see how this can become much more specific and much more successful. I think there's a company called Eternal, which maybe some of you guys have heard about, which is essentially a longevity clinic, but their messaging is all focused on people who are like weekend warrior athletes, people who are hobbyists, not even necessarily running triathlons, but people, for example, who love to ski, people who love to play tennis, people who love to play golf, and they focus all of what they do and their messaging around that. From a tool set perspective, the tools that they use are probably 99% the same as the other clinic that's doing holistic longevity and the other men's health clinic. It's mostly the same tools, but how it's articulated is much more specific. And I think that can make a big difference. Next question relates to hiring and talent. Philip from our group asks, he's building a new longevity practice. If he wants to hire somebody to prioritize business development, online, social media, marketing, what qualifications or qualities should you look for in a candidate? So you've obviously hired a lot of people to do this sort of thing in the past. What advice would you give?
Yeah, I think good question. I think I'm going to assume that this practice at least has some sort of digital component because you're referencing online offerings and social media. I would hire someone who's super sharp, who's really hungry, and who has like tremendous aptitude are probably the like main things I would look for. You need this is your first hire, your second hire, like you need this person to be able to have outsized impact. And so like aptitude and drive and hunger, I think are going to be most important from and the ability to learn, right? This person isn't going to come in and be an expert at digital product design, social media, performance marketing, but you probably need someone who can dabble in all those things. Aptitude, hunger, and ability to learn are the qualities I would look for. If you're looking to launch a digital business,
I know Philip's business does have a website, but it's primarily a local clinic. Philip, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think some of what you just said still applies.
I think if in a world in which the digital component is an important part of the business, getting people through your conversion funnel is really important. I have less experience with local brick and mortar businesses, but I think if you're a digital business or your digital offerings are a core part of your offering, figuring out ways to get people to purchase your product is really important. And I think the qualifications, skills, and qualities that I referred to me are probably paramount. But if you're going to, as a secondary lens, look at what experience do they have, like someone who has some experience with digital and maybe more on the product development capability. So they know how to build a landing page, or will they be able to learn how to build a landing page, run conversion experiments on the website, I think are probably the secondary kind of experience lens. If we're talking about a brick and mortar practice, there is probably going to be more impetus on getting people into your four walls. I still think that those qualities of aptitude, hunger, ability to learn are probably the most important. The balance of experience may favor someone who has some experience working in brick and mortar and has demonstrated the ability to figure out how to get people to come into a location.
I hope that helps, Philip. There's another question that piggybacks off of that, which is for people who are building non-VC backed businesses, primarily local businesses, how would you think about ROI metrics and the value of, from a portfolio approach perspective, how would you think about investing in paid marketing versus local events versus organic social media? How would you think about driving your first set of clients? How would you think about investing there?
Yeah, admittedly less experience here. Honestly, not being a VC backed business or having to operate profitably out of the gate can be a real benefit because it forces you to be scrappy and test a number of like relatively low cost, low investment initiatives and pilots. I think even if in the digital space, it's something that you can do. And I think that like brands that are using some of the things I think are interesting right now. I think one of the hot topics right now in marketing is AEO or answer engine optimization and figuring out ways to create content that is going to get picked up in ChatGPT and the other LLMs. There are less barriers to entry on this than SEO, where you need to have enough traffic to your site for Google to think you have enough authority to rank you. And like AEO feels more gameable by more nascent brands because you don't need to have a ton of traffic out the gate to create content that is good and gets certain LLMs to include your content in their answers to people's queries. I would focus on piloting different experiments in a brick and mortar setting, low cost, low investment out the gate, be scrappy and figure out where you're getting signal. So things like attending local conferences and local events, for example, should be relatively inexpensive and a way to start getting the word out there about your business.
A lot of good advice there. I'll just add, I think that events can be really powerful. And you said this too, Matt. We saw this in Modern Age. Like some of our most efficient acquisition tools were events that we would put on in the clinic, right? It would be an evening mixer on a topic. Sometimes we'd have a guest speaker. Sometimes actually, I don't think we even had a guest speaker sometimes. I think it does help to have a speaker, some kind of reason to show up. Those things are not that expensive to put on compared to how much you spend on paid channels. Spending a couple $100s to put on an evening mixer can be much more efficient, especially for brick and mortar. You get people to come into your space, they experience it, they meet some of the staff, they start to build a relationship. I think these can be really great. I think the other thing is just developing relationships with other businesses that have clients like the ones that you're looking for. For those of us building health businesses, finding gyms are really great partners, especially like local small gyms. I'm not talking, or something that's franchised, owned and operated, because those will be run by small business owners who are looking for growth and partnership and a way to make local business stand out. Very easy value proposition to add where you can say, hey, can you put some of my material in your business? In return, like you can give them some sort of a discount, right? There's easy ways to do this. And I think these tactics can actually help. And I do agree with you that not having a VC-backed business can have a level of discipline, can enforce a level of discipline that I think ultimately can serve you over the long term.
Take your look. Some of the other things that come to mind. You still need to make sure that you still need a website so people can find out about you. You still need a social media presence. You need to make sure that your local location is showing up in all the obvious places on Google, Yelp, etc. You should be thinking about how to get customer reviews. If you're a single location in a city, you're having 25-star reviews is probably going to be a lot more impactful for you than if you're a national brand with Trustpilot reviews or something along those lines. These are things I'm sure you all are thinking about, but seem like obvious add-ons to your comments.
Somebody asked on LinkedIn about how to get education on longevity space with no graduate degree, no bachelor's, and a bachelor's degree. Highly recommend you check out my educational programs, nextgenerationmedicine.co/core. We have a $29 a month education program that will help you do exactly that. So check that out. I'll send you the link so everyone else can see it too. I think we might be through most of the questions at this point. There was so much great information that you shared, Matt. I really appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate everyone who's tuned in for listening and submitting great questions. I know a lot of you are going to watch the recording also. For those of you who are in the group, you'll watch the recording. These are all recorded for people who are part of our group. I hope you'll find this useful. With that, I want to thank you, Matt, for joining all of us today, and I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend.
Yeah, super great and I'll spend time with you and hopefully it's helpful to you all who are on the call today. Look forward to staying in touch.
Take care, everyone. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye.